Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you all for this very first event for the Bletchley Park Week. Kellogg College has a historic relationship with Bletchley Park, and every year we have a Bletchley Park Week. This year we focused it around histories of the Second World War. If you want to know more about why Kellogg has this relationship with Bletchley, there's a short video on our website where the president, Professor Jonathan Mickey, explains why we have this history and this relationship with Bletchley Park. So this is our very first event in the Bletchley Park Week, and we've got a whole series of events happening this week. Just two highlights I'll bring to your attention. On Thursday at 1 o'clock, Wendy Webster will be talking about diversity and her book, Mixing It, Diversity in Second World War Britain. So that's Professor Wendy Webster on Thursday, and that will be a really fascinating event. I've heard Wendy speak before, and it promises to be really very interesting. And on Friday at 1 o'clock, Dorian Linsky, who's a journalist and writer, will talk about his book about Orwell and 1984, thinking about the book that he wrote, and that's on Friday at 1 o'clock. So have a look at the Kellogg website for other events that are happening this week. But this evening, I'm very pleased to welcome Shrabani Basu, who is our speaker. Shrabani graduated in history from St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and completed her master's at Delhi University. And she began her career as a journalist in the bustling offices of the Times of India in Bombay. And she's been a London correspondent for some of India's most distinguished newspapers. Now, Shrabani has written many very acclaimed non-fiction books, including the one she's going to talk about this evening, Spy Princess, The Life of Noor Inayat Khan. She's also written Curry, The Story of the Nation's Favorite Dish, Victoria and Abdul, The True Story of the Queen's Closest Confidant, which you may have seen dramatized as a film. And I feel like my timing with Shrabani is good, because just after I asked her to come and speak here this evening, I saw a newspaper article that her book about Noor Inayat is being turned into a TV series, so we might be able to ask her about that this evening. And then shortly after that, I saw another story that she had a new book out. And so I hope we can also ask her about that and her new book, which has just been published very recently, The Mystery of the Parsi Lawyer, Arthur Conan Doyle, George Adalji and the Case of the Foreigner in the English Village. So if we have time, we will definitely turn to that later. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Shrabani. Shrabani's going to give a talk, and then we're going to have a conversation with some questions. And please do put questions in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand if you would like to ask a question in person later on in the evening. So I will hand over to you now, Shrabani.
Thanks a lot, Yasmin. That was a lovely introduction, and thank you all for coming in and to listening to Noor. She's one of my heroines, so I love talking about her. And what I'm going to do this evening is give you a little talk, so you can see a few images of Noor, so you can familiarize yourself with the background, and then I'll have a little chat with Yasmin, one of my favorite authors. Let me share the screen and bring up Noor and so this is Noor's father. He was Indian. He was his name is Hazrat Inayat Khan, and he was from Baroda in India. He, as you can see, he played this instrument called the veena. He was a musician, and he was a Sufi, and he was told by his teacher to take Sufism to the West. And just to let you know what Sufism is a branch of Islam which believes in music and meditation. And he was now told by his teacher to take it to the West. So he goes, he takes his brothers, and here they are in all their glory, all his brothers, and he says, let's go. And they go to the USA. And they start this band. They call themselves the Royal Musicians of Hindustan. You can see how happy they look here. So they were really popular. He would lecture, tour, and it was on one of these tours that he met this young woman, Ora Ray Baker. She was American, and they fell in love, instantly fell in love, and they got married. So this is Noor's mother. They came to London, got married, and Ora Ray Baker then became She converted, she became a Sufi. She started wearing the sari, and she took the name of Amina Begum. So these are Noor's parents. Noor's upbringing was really exotic. Her father got an invitation to go to Moscow, and Noor was born in Moscow. So here she is. This is little baby Noor, held by her father, and he used to call her Babuli. Babuli means my little daughter. But very soon, she's born in 1914. Trouble breaks out in Russia, and they're advised to leave the country immediately. So this is also just before the First World War. They come to England, and they live in a house donated by a Sufi. And soon, 3 more children are born, and here they are. There's Noor with the ribbon on her hair. There's the uncles in the background. And this is the family, her brothers, 2 brothers, and a younger sister. Now, they spent the First World War, the war years, in London. And then in 1920, they moved to France, where another Sufi gives them this beautiful house. It's on the edge of Paris in Suresnes. And Hazrat Inayat Khan calls it Fazal Manzil, which means house of blessing. And it's here that Noor grows up. This is still the family house. They sit, you can see it's on a hill. So the children would sit on the steps, they're looking out over the lights of Paris. They would dress up in their Indian clothes, and they love messing around. But it was also an open house full of music, meditation. The Sufis would gather, they would have their summer camps. Now, of course, the Sufis here in the West, they were all white Europeans and Americans. So this is his following. The only Indians were the Inayat Khan family. And very, very quickly, in 1927, actually, Hazrat Inayat Khan goes to India and he dies. He was longing to return to India. He goes there and the family know he won't come back. He dies in India, and her mother, Noor's mother, just goes into depression. She locks herself in her bedroom, doesn't come out. And this poem you see is Noor trying to draw out her mother. She calls her Amma, and she says, it's a poem to her. She tries to bring her mother out of the depression. And soon Amina Begum starts wearing Western clothes again. You can see her, looking different here. Noor is just a young teenager. She's probably about 13 in this picture. And she is in charge of the family. She has to look after her siblings. So very early in her life, she has this sense of responsibility. And I think she is going to, carry this, and a sense of sacrifice as well. And she's going to carry this through. The family are all musicians, and Noor used to play the harp. So this is her playing the harp. Claire, her sister, is sitting next to her. One of her brothers played the cello. Another brother played the violin. They were a quartet, and they would give concerts in Fazal Manzil. Noor herself wanted to learn to play the veena, her father's instrument, and here she is playing the veena. You can see this is a room. They used to call it the Oriental Room. It's still the Oriental Room in Fazal Manzil. It's a beautiful place, and I've been there. You can feel the history. It's full of all these beautiful paintings. And this family, I'll come to the princess bit of the story. So Noor is descended from Tipu Sultan. Now, most of you may have heard of Tipu Sultan. You might have seen his tiger in the V&A. He was a ruler of Mysore, of southern India. He died fighting the British in 1799, and his treasures are in many museums all over England. So the V&A has his tiger, and he was known as the Tiger of Mysore. So the family felt, Hazrat Inayat Khan, their father, would tell them that you have the blood of Tipu in your veins. And I think that later on in life, that really worked for Noor. It gave her a lot of courage. So moving on, I'm going rather quickly through her life, just to give you an impression of what she was. Here's Noor. As an adult, she was a dreamy teenager, musician. She started writing children's stories, and they were being published. Her first book was published in 1939 called The 20 Jaataka Tales. And this is a sort of retelling of Buddhist tales. And Noor loved these stories. She liked stories about heroism. She liked stories of bravery, myths, legends, Greek tales, and she loved retelling these. So this was published in London, but the year it's published is 1939. And now we know that the war is coming. So all her dreams of becoming a writer of children's books are soon going to be dashed. And in 1940, so this is probably one of the last images of all four of them together. In 1940, Noor, with the German army poised to enter Paris, Noor and so this is Noor and her brother Vilayat, they sit down in the Oriental Room and they take a decision. They decide that even though they were Sufis, they believed in nonviolence, it was important for them to do something in the war. They couldn't just stand by. So they decide to come to England and volunteer for the war effort. And this is London. They arrive with a few months, the Blitz, it's all bombed out. Vilayat sees these German aircraft bombing and he says, I'm going to sign up for the RAF. And following her brother, Noor goes and says, well, I'll sign up for the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. So she goes to join the WAF. And here she is in her uniform. She loved her WAF uniform. And she just becomes a number now. Suddenly from this very exotic, very refined life, very genteel background that she came from, where she's known as the daughter of the Pirzadi Noor Inayat Khan, she's suddenly just a number, and she calls herself Nora, just because it's easy to pronounce, which is it sounds like Noor, but it's also like her mother's name, Ora. So she's known to most of her WAF colleagues as Nora. And in the WAF, she is trained in as a radio operator. So this is going to be really important because this is the first batch of women radio operators being trained. So far, this work has been done only by men. And it's important because it is one of the most dangerous areas in the field. And all the men operators being sent to France were dying in 6 weeks. So they were desperate for new people. And Noor's file shows that she is fluent in French. She speaks French like a French person. So one day she gets this letter, and it's just a letter inviting her for an interview. She thinks she might get a promotion in the WAF. She borrows money. She has a new hairdo, and she goes feeling really chirpy. And the man in the room just talks to her in French, and she's a bit puzzled. And then he tells her that you are going to be sent as a secret agent to France. You will not be in uniform, so not this beautiful WAF uniform. You'll be like a civilian, and if you're caught, you will be shot. And will you take the job? And Noor says yes. So the next stage of her life begins. This is now the life in the secret, her secret service life in the SOE. She has been recruited by this small organization called the Special Operations Executive, and their work, it's been set up by Churchill, and their work is to go into the occupied areas and help the resistance. So sabotage railway lines, supply arms and money to the resistance, and Noor, as a wireless operator, is going to be sending messages as well back to the field. So here her training begins in a series of country homes in England. This is the one in Bewley in Hampshire. It's beautiful. One of the teachers actually was Kim Philby, which is quite interesting. Of course, she is trained now in all the Secret Service, everything that's needed of a secret agent, how to find a source, how to find a dead letterbox, a live letterbox, how to unpick locks, recognize the enemy. All the uniforms are shown to them, study maps of Paris, of course, which she knows. And finally, she is given a code name, Madeleine. She practices her signature. This is one of my favorite things from her file. She was very, very dedicated. Though, remember her background, she is a musician, she hates arms. So her reports show that she hates the arms training, but she's a fast runner and she's a very good operator. So on the night of June 13, it has to be a full moon night. June 16, sorry, Noor is flown. This is 1943. She is flown in on a Lysander to France. And the flights always went out on full moon night so that they could see the landing area clearly. But of course, the problem with this was that from the ground, the aircraft could be spotted. So you were in danger of being shot straight away. Noor lands in Paris. She links up with her circuit, which is the Prosper Circuit. It's the biggest circuit. He was from Cambridge, Francis Suttle, a barrister who's the head of the circuit. But within a week, the circuit is betrayed and everyone is arrested. It's called the circuit is blown. Somebody has informed on them. This keeps happening. And top operatives are arrested. Noor is safe. She goes immediately into hiding. London tells her, come back. It's very dangerous. We send a flight for you. But she says no. She says she's going to stay on. She's the last post left between London and Paris. And she's going to work with this man, Franz Antelme. He's also a resistance, SOE trained resistance worker. And she says, we're going to rebuild this circuit. So she stays on in this very dangerous field. And she survives. Now, most of her colleagues survived for 6 weeks because the job of a radio operator was really dangerous. And suddenly, this, gentle, this musician and writer has turned into Madeleine, the spy that the Germans can't catch. Here she is. She keeps changing her appearance. You can see how different she looks. She changes her hair. And as a radio operator, she has to be constantly on the run because she has to carry this heavy suitcase around with her. The wireless is in this. She has to learn to put it up quickly. She has to learn to transmit quickly. And then she has to run away from the spot because the Germans can hear her and they will come down and catch them really fast. And this is how the operators, the male operators, were all being arrested. So she is very good. Where they survived only 6 weeks, Noor Inayat Khan survives for 3 months. She has narrow escapes. She talks her way out of them. And I'll give you one of the little stories that I love, is when she's trying to put up this aerial and it's on she just goes outside her flat. She has to send an urgent message. She goes to this tree and she starts hanging it up. And she hears a voice from behind saying, excuse me, mademoiselle, what are you doing? And it's an SS officer standing right behind her. And she says, oh, I was just trying to listen to the wireless. And she mentions one radio station which was banned so that it looks like she's breaking a small law. And he is just charmed. And this man is melting. He says, I'll help you, mademoiselle. So he helps put the wireless up, not knowing that half an hour later, she's transmitting to London. So she keeps at it. I mean, this is occupied Paris. She had never seen anything like this. The swastikas hanging, informers everywhere, plainclothes Gestapo, curfew. And she has to find her way. She has to send her messages. She starts using all her old contacts, her music teacher, her doctor. She just lands up in their house and she transmits. She would have survived. She would have returned because London said, now you can come back. But the news was tightening around her and she was going to be betrayed. Just before she leaves for London, she is betrayed by the sister of one of the people in her circuit, another agent. And her address is given to the Gestapo. They come in, they arrest her, and they take her to this prison on Avenue Foch. And the prisoners are kept high up in the attic rooms. But immediately, Noor makes an escape attempt. She tries to get out, but she's caught. Then she makes a second escape attempt with 2 other prisoners. And it's all very dramatic. I won't get into all that. But unfortunately, they climb up on the roof. They would have got away. It would have been like Escape from Colditz. But they are caught because the RAF started bombing at that time. And now, with so many escape attempts, with the fact that she has bitten her captors, she has fought back, they call her a tigress. And she is now sent off to Germany. She becomes the first woman British prisoner to go to Germany. She's taken to a camp in Pforzheim, and she is kept in shackles. She is starved, beaten, interrogation. For 10 months, she is tortured brutally, but she reveals nothing. And then finally, she is gathered up one night. She's asked to leave her cell, and she is taken on a train, and she's taken to Dachau Concentration Camp with 3 other agents. And this is, all of you are familiar with this, Arbeit macht frei. This is written on the gates of all the concentration camps. Dachau was the first concentration camp. Here she is beaten all night. She's separated from the others, mainly because she's dark-skinned and because she has a label saying dangerous prisoner. I mean, just the thought of how Noor Inayat Khan could have become this dangerous prisoner is amazing, but she was labeled like that, and she's tortured all night, beaten, kicked, and finally this SS officer puts a gun to her head and point blank he fires. But Noor is, her spirit is not going to be broken. She goes down screaming liberté. So he can't break her spirit. Shortly after that, the bodies are all dragged to the crematoriums, and they are then, the ash is just scattered outside. This is just a simple plaque in Dachau. It says graves of thousands unknown. It's now a flower garden, so that is nice, but it is a very bleak place. This is the plaque. There is a memorial room in Dachau, so this is a plaque to Noor Inayat Khan. She was posthumously awarded the George Cross, Britain's highest civilian honor, and France awarded her the Croix de Guerre. So she was highly recognized with the top honors. But her story was forgotten over all these years, and I felt I had to write it, which I did. And then lots of people started writing to me that there should be a memorial for her. So my goodness, that was the next stage. Campaign for a memorial, and this was unveiled by Princess Anne in 2012. So that was very, very special. It was the first memorial for an Asian woman in Britain in a public space, and this is in Gordon Square near where she lived. And last year, this is the memorial, and last year, and then there was a stamp. Royal Mail contacted me and said, we want to do a stamp, and I said, hooray, yes, please, how can I help? So we got the photograph, and this was the stamp. And last year was a blue plaque, which I had campaigned for from 2006, and it was finally unveiled in the middle of the lockdown. So it stands outside her house, 4 Taverton Street. So this is, in brief, Noor's story. Just click. Close this down now. I'm back. Is that okay? Yeah.
Thank you, Shrabani. Thank you. It's such a story, and it's immensely moving, really. Even if you know how the story is going to end, it's an incredible story to hear. And I guess I'm struck by the motivations of Noor, because reading the book, I wondered whether she's in some ways quite a fragile person, and yet at the same time has such immense bravery and grit and determination. So I wonder if what was kind of motivating.
I think that was the reason. I had to know how any Asian woman, lands in the heart of the war in Europe, what motivated her. And I think, meeting her family, that sort of explained it to me. She was somebody who took on this responsibility from when she was a child. She was somebody who loved, if you see her stories that she wrote as a child, they were all, Joan of Arc, Rani of Jhansi. She's inspired by these brave women. So somehow she always had these brave women in her, in her radar. And I think what kept her going, what I said before, that her father would tell her, you have the blood of Tipu Sultan in your veins. She felt that. She had this courage, this inner strength, which was recognized by her, all her superiors and those who employed her. Because though she was fragile and dreaming and a musician, and there were lots of doubts about her, a lot of people thought that she couldn't go, because here was somebody who said, I believe in nonviolence, and you're there in the front line. Here was somebody who said, I can't tell a lie. You're going in as a secret agent with a false passport. You are going to lie. So of course she is pragmatic. She did, obviously she does what she has to do as a secret agent. But I think it is this inner strength that she had, and that came from her Sufi background, her father's teachings, loyalty. She doesn't break. It is unbelievable how much she is tortured. She is shackled. Her arms are, there's a chain going between her arms, two between her legs, and her legs to her hand, one in between. So she had to hop everywhere. She couldn't change. She had to be fed. She was kept in isolation. Anyone would break, but she just kept on. And she motivated others. Somehow, when it's in the book, how she motivates other prisoners by tapping messages. So she's always just ready to keep going. I think that is the inspiring. Her story, though it is dark, as you say, and as we all know, what is really motivating is and inspiring is her courage, her determination, and her inner strength. And that this woman, she's determined to fight fascism. She believes that even if she has to sacrifice her life, so be it. This is a fight she has to do.
And that final word, liberté, is very revealing in that sense also, because there is a really strong commitment there to the cause that she's fighting for as well. I think that comes across.
Yeah.
I think her family are absolutely fascinating, and one of the things which is very rich and detailed in the book are just the level of detail that you're able to get into. There's a huge amount of detail around her family and her experiences and observations of her, so you really are able to tell all the kind of complexities of her life, and that's wonderful. So I wonder how you got to some of that material, and I can see questions in the chat popping up about around her family and meeting her family, because you've mentioned that you actually were able to meet her family.
I did. I was lucky, when I was researching the book. So it's been 15 years since the book was published, and I was researching in 2003. Vilayat, her brother, she was closest to her brother Vilayat. Vilayat was alive. The family house is still Suren, the same house. So, walked up those stairs. I couldn't believe it. Met Vilayat in person, walked into that oriental room. And he just spoke to me, about Noor, what she was, how every day he thinks about her. And, what her motivation was. He said she was determined. And then I spoke to her second brother, Hidayat, and he said that if she had survived this war, she would have, because this whole family really believed, they were also very, nationalist is a sort of not a good word these days, but they believed in freedom. They believed in Indian independence. So there's this conflict happening as well. Their father believed in Indian independence. He sang for Gandhi. And, Gandhi was in tears listening to Hazrat Inayat Khan sing. So this family believed in Indian independence. She followed, she read Nehru. She was an admirer of Gandhi, Nehru. And Hidayat, her brother, said that if this war was, if she'd survived this war, she would have her next cause would have been fighting for Indian independence. So she was really committed. And in fact, she tells her friend that if the Indian soldiers and people like us, if we sacrifice for this war, then the British might, give us our independence, because we, as a reward for our loyalty. So that was also one of her motivating factors, one among, all the others.
Yeah, that's really fascinating how those two things could sit side by side. And I think, my own work, I've looked at the role of India in the Second World War and thought about that. And definitely what comes across is an ambivalence, a very deep ambivalence. On the one hand, a very strong desire for freedom from imperialism, most obviously shown by Gandhi and the nationalists who were sort of fighting in 1942 and taking part in the Quit India movement, but also this great sort of contribution that's made by the 2.5 million soldiers from India who join the armed forces. So you have these two things sort of running parallel at the same time. And for a lot of people, it's actually much more grey than that. It's much more ambivalent. It's wanting to actually support the war effort, yet also wanting freedom from empire. And I think that seems to come across in this story too.
And in fact, there's this really interesting interview she goes to for the RAF, and this is in 1942. And they ask her point blank, where do your loyalties lie? Do they lie? Because at that time, Subhash Bose had escaped, and all the Indian freedom fighters, they were all in jail after the 1942, after the Quit India movement. So the Congress leadership is all in jail, and she is asked, where would your loyalties lie? Would they lie with the enemies of India or with Britain? And she gets very angry because her loyalty has been questioned. And she says that as long as the war is on, and I have volunteered for this war, I am on the side of Britain. But after the war is over, I believe in Indian independence. And she says this to a panel of RAF, all these officers, and they are shocked. She doesn't get that job. She doesn't get that commission, actually. But she is then taken taken by the SOE. So she leaves the WAF and goes to the SOE. But it's really, she was very upset. So Vilayat told me about that interview. And she said she came back shaking and said, I lost my temper. I shouldn't have, but they questioned my loyalty. I was never going to betray anybody. And she does it, right till the end. So she's also so focused. She's just in her 20s. And for me, it was like, how can somebody in their 20s, be so focused that this war against fascism is important to fight? After this is my next target. So, it's just bewildering how, when you think of what we were like in our 20s, goodness.
Yeah. And also just to have come from such a cosmopolitan kind of elite sort of life, where she was, as you say, writing poetry and playing music, and to have then this kind of transforming moment of the war really absolutely changes everything about her life, which I think was the case for so many people, but in this instance just seems so dramatic. I mean, when you see those images and the transition that she goes through at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. She dyed her hair, so she was spotted by one of her neighbors suddenly cycling down the Champs-Élysées with red hair, and her neighbor shouts "Noor," and they're not supposed to. So she sort of says no, and she sort of indicates that you're not. But even with that red hair, she recognized her, and she looked terrible, so she quickly changed her hair again. It did suit her, red hair.
It's funny because I think a lot of people listening to this might think, be surprised how the Asians were living in Paris in this way in the early 20th century, or were marrying and moving around in the way that Inayat Khan, her father, was. But actually, I mean, quite a lot of your work has looked at sort of people coming to Britain, if you think of Abdul much earlier in the 19th century as well. So it's perhaps there was perhaps more coming and going from Europe than people sometimes imagine.
Yes, there was a steady stream of people. It's like Hazrat Inayat Khan went there to spread Sufism. There were others who came to study. There were travelers. There was one of the first accounts is by somebody called Vilayat, who writes about my travels. So there was this man who came as a 17-year-old whose his name was, he's one of my favorites as well, Deen Muhammad. He came and he married an Irish lady, and then he started the first curry house in London called the Hindustan Coffee House, and he started this in 1810. So there were travelers. He wrote his accounts in English, and again, one of the first authors to be published in English. And then he went to Brighton and set up what he called a shampoo parlor. His clients included the Prince of Wales. So he was the royal shampooing surgeon to the royals. And shampoo is something that comes from the Indian head massage, and it's called champi. So that, things that are now so trendy was something this man had done ages ago. It was the bath houses and the steam and vapor baths that he set up in Brighton. And it was all very exotic. He had an exotic list of clients. He dressed exotically, and his portrait, his oil painting, is hanging in Brighton, in the museum in Brighton. So yes, there were lots of travelers.
And in terms of getting the plaque for Noor and the amazing work that you have done with the Memorial Trust to sort of publicize her story and bring attention to her story. I mean, I think a lot of people here this evening probably have heard of her story through the work that you've done. I mean, how difficult has that been, or did you just feel that there was a commitment that you needed to do that? So I suppose, how did all that come about? Because you've done all these things to bring her story to lots of people.
Yeah, well, it's not what I expected when I was writing the book. So I wrote this book, and because I studied in India and I had never heard of Noor Inayat Khan. So I felt, this is a gap in our knowledge. And then, of course, here in Britain, no one had heard of her. So, I felt that both countries, we don't know about her. And when I met her brothers, and, they were in their 80s and they were so earnest, and they said, do you think people will be interested in Noor? When Hidayat asked me, I said, when I've written this book, I promise you, I'm going to make Noor a household name. So it was like this, little promise to him. But of course, I didn't know. I just thought it'll be through my book. But I started getting so many letters, and my readers wrote to me saying, why isn't there a memorial for Noor? Why didn't we know her story? And I felt, who's going to do this? This has to come to me. It's my responsibility. So I actually said, well, a blue plaque would be very nice. And there was an exchange of letters in the Times, and somewhere I mentioned the blue plaque. And English Heritage saw that letter, and they contacted me and said, we notice you want a blue plaque. And I said, yes, that would be lovely. And they said, why don't you apply? So in 2006, I filled up this form, I did everything, and I submitted it. And 6 months later, yes, you won't believe it, I got a call and they said, we've had our meeting and sorry, it's been rejected. And I said, what? You asked me to fill this form? I couldn't believe it. And they said, yeah, there are little technical problems. It wasn't her house, it was her mother's house. And she was not living there most of the time. I said, yes, there was a war on. She was out training. And I don't usually lose my temper, but believe me, that day I lost my temper. I said, yes, all Indian women live with their mothers. She was not knitting socks in the house. She was training to be a secret agent. But that was that. And so English Heritage closed its doors. And that's how the nice, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. And that was me. And I said, I'm going to now make a memorial and put it up outside that house where they rejected the blue plaque. And I didn't know what to do. I've never done anything like this. I spoke to my friends and I said, okay, let's set up this trust. And then it was 2010 and a lot of Asian MPs, women MPs had been elected for the first time. And I said, let me approach these women, which I did. And then it was like, I just lobbied everyone who was going, I would tell them the story of Noor and I had to start from scratch. And finally, a lot of people supported it and we got the permission. Then we had to raise the funds. So that was crazy. So we raised the funds. And in 2 years, Princess Anne, then I said, I want Princess Anne because she's the head of the Fannies. And also she is London University and this statue was going up in Gordon Square. And she agreed and that was it. So we had this, beautiful ceremony which had the Sufi elements as well as, the spit and polish of the military side. We had the Fannies, we had Princess Anne, and people came from France, they came from Netherlands, they came from the US. It was amazing. They filled the square. I think there were like 400 or so in that square, and people stood outside the square with holding flowers. I will never forget that day. It was just beautiful. And then, of course, English Heritage, because I would not let go of the blue plaque. Every time I would write a letter in the Times and say, yes, English Heritage rejected. I wouldn't let it go. And so I became a nuisance. And they finally called me and they said, you can reapply in 10 years. Please reapply. And I knew that this time, it had gone too far. Of course, it would be accepted. So it was. And then 2020, all that is past. We got the blue plaque. We got there in the end. And they now have a whole program to get more women on blue plaques. So, we're going to see a lot more women, which is great. But Noor, again, was the first Asian to get a blue plaque. Amazing.
First Asian
woman. So yeah. There have been men. There are 11 men. Gandhi has 3 plaques. One is not good enough for him. But poor Noor wasn't getting any. I mean, they're all very deserving men. I'm not saying that, but why were the women just blanked out? But anyway, she's got there now. So yeah,
Well
we're in
done.
this space. So
well done. I mean, it's such a story of determination on your part, and keeping going with something. It's great. I mean, it's really inspiring what you've managed to achieve with that, and now a TV series as well to follow.
Yeah, oh well, it's been optioned for television, so let's hope, fingers crossed, it gets made. I think the more that happens, the story just keeps going. So I think it was last year, or was it? Yeah, Noor featured in an episode of Doctor Who, and that was really real fun because whole new audience, and she is a time traveling doctor, needs a message sent, and who better to send it than Noor on her radio? So I had a whole lot of kids then, sort of getting aware of Noor and wanting to know more. I get letters from school children who want to do projects, teachers who want to do projects, university students. So it's really nice, that her story's gone up so much.
Yeah, no, it is. I think it's a real focal point for people who are interested in thinking about different ways of commemorating the Second World War, and also the kind of role of people from around the world who were in Britain at the time. I want to allow other people to ask questions, and I can see things in the chat, but please do put questions in the chat if you have them to ask.
All right. Well, actually, I haven't seen that Netflix film. So it was an option. I wasn't involved. I wasn't a consultant. So it's also 3 characters. So Noor is just one of the characters. I will see it at some time, but I haven't had the time to see it. The Time Watch was actually based a lot on my book, because they interviewed me and took a lot of the details. And Vilayat had died by then, so they could get only Hidayat. But yeah, it's based a lot on many of the things from my book. It was shown after my book came out, and they interviewed me for it. Sort of credited in the references somewhere at the bottom where you can't see, but there we are.
There's a question one of the first questions is from Marcia, is about why Noor was sent to Dachau and not Ravensbrück, which was the women's concentration camp in Germany. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think from Pforzheim prison, Black Forest, she was then transported with 3 other SOE agents, so 3 women. And that journey actually was so moving, because they were told that they are going as agricultural laborers, as most people were. So they had no idea, and their handcuffs were removed. So for the first time, they actually out in the open air, especially for Noor, out after 10 months, and able to speak English to another, another colleague. They were given this. The train went through this beautiful Bavarian countryside, looking at the mountains. They had a little picnic, they ate sausages, they smoked their cigarettes, they watched the skies, and suddenly they felt free for that one day, in a strange way. But they didn't know that the person escorting them, his name was Max Wasma, he was carrying the execution orders with him. So the minute, the very day they went, that same night, she was locked up in a separate cell, and they were all executed.
And how do you know all that detail? It's amazing, it's incredible amount of detail. Is it from other women who were with her, or diaries, or how do you get to that sort of grain of information?
So what happened after the war is Vera Atkins, who was their, one of their commanding officers, she had sent these women into the field. She went searching for them, but they thought Noor had died in Natzweiler concentration camp in France. She had been missing for over a year. The family were desperate. There was no news, and these moving letters are in the archives. But one day, now I told you about Pforzheim prison, where she had tapped messages and scratched on her food bowl and contacted other prisoners. Well, so she had scratched her address, 4 Taviton Street, on a bowl and given it to this prisoner. And she and said, "We'll meet after the war." And this prisoner came, after the war, she came, Yolande. Her name was Yolande. She was French. She came looking for Noor. She couldn't find her in that house, in the offices, and then she came to the house, 4 Taviton Street. And that's how the family knew. And that's when the SOE knew that she was in Pforzheim. They had no idea. Then they checked the prison records from Pforzheim, and they see the day she's entered in Pforzheim and the day she is discharged, and that she has been discharged for Dachau. So these records then came up. And the eyewitnesses, so Yolande is an eyewitness as to how much they tortured her in Pforzheim, because they could hear her crying in her, they could hear her being slapped, they could see that she was kept all alone. So these are eyewitness accounts of the torture. And of course, the SOE got to know about Noor because of Yolande. And then they had, when they had all the trials afterwards, that's when we get to know how she was captured, that she had been betrayed. So the officer, the head of the commandant of the Gestapo in Paris, he is Kiefer, Hans Kiefer. He is, in his interrogation files, he reveals. Then all the others give their accounts. So they are there in the National Archives in her files. And yes, it's such a chilling story, because they have her address and they describe she's wearing this blue dress, she walks out of the flat, we follow her, then we lose her, because Noor's very fast, she manages to lose people. But because they had their address, her address, they entered her flat, and one of them was waiting for her, Pierre. So these accounts are all there in the archives, and it's not just her records. I also looked at all the colleagues she was working with and all their records, and sometimes her messages in their files, and then you have to, it's like a giant jigsaw puzzle, then you have to put it together. But yeah, I mean, there are still gaps with the Secret Service, you know, meetings are held in secret, there's always gaps. So there's more out there that has never been recorded, maybe will be found someday. But, you know, I did the best I could and pieced together as much as I could of what happened in Paris.
Well, you really have, and it comes across very clearly in the book that you've been able to draw all these different individuals and those different accounts together. There's a question in the chat from Sarah saying, should she not have been treated as a POW, or that as an operative, perhaps being considered as a soldier?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So she was told that she wouldn't be in uniform, so you're not a POW. And spies, if spies are caught, they are shot. That is their fate. She was a secret agent, so you know they would capture her. And
would she have known about how short-lived most of those missions were at that time? That the 6 weeks was the average.
I think they had a sense of how dangerous things are, and she could see her whole circuit has gone, you know, within a week of her landing. So she can see the danger all around her. She herself makes, I mean, it's in the book, the details, she makes so many escape attempts. She's set up to meet these people. She actually meets the Germans, but they don't arrest her that day. And she's talking, she thinks they are two agents from Canada, and they are actually Germans. And but they don't arrest her that day. They want to follow her and see who else she's meeting. So she escapes that day, but they've seen her face to face. By then they know who she is. And they set out this whole operation, you know, to find her and arrest her. But she keeps escaping. She really makes it difficult for them to arrest her, and would have reached London, back in London, if she hadn't been betrayed.
Gosh. I don't want to sort of prevent people from asking questions. So if you do have any final questions to put to Shrabani, please do write them in the chat, or if you'd rather just ask them yourself, raise your hand with the using the button at the bottom with the reactions. You know, if there's anything that people would like to say.
What about her female colleagues at SOE? Were they captured as early as the men? Yes, well, the men had gone in there earlier, but her female colleagues were captured. I mean, there were 4 of them who died in Dachau that day. There were 13 SOE agents who went to France, women agents, didn't come back. So she's part of the 13 who didn't return. And others were arrested, like Odette was arrested, but she managed to come back. Violette Zabu is another agent many of you have heard of. She was executed in Ravensbrück. Others were executed in Natzweiler, and that was a terrible, apparently they were thrown into the crematoriums and they were still alive. So again, eyewitnesses have recorded this. So yeah, it was absolutely tragic what happened to the women agents and the men agents. Many of them were executed in the camps as well.
There's a very good question about whether her torturers were brought to book after the war, or if the Nazis involved were prosecuted.
Yes, they were. So Kiefer, the one who shot her, as you know, the SS officer who shot her, Wilhelm Rupert, he was executed. Kiefer sat in the court and actually had tears saying, "I could," because he couldn't shoot her. He could have shot her in Paris actually after her escape attempt, but he pointed the gun at her and he couldn't bring himself to fire, and then he sent her away to Germany. But of course, you know, he cried these crocodile tears saying, "I didn't know this would happen to her in Germany." But Vera Atkins was there and she said, you know, just spare those tears. So she was really, really angry with him. But yes, so all these people were, when they had all the, you know, the interrogations afterwards, so many of them were executed.
And was she betrayed for a specific reason? Is there a story behind the betrayal?
Yes, of course. And it is a story of, you know, jealousy, unfortunately, because Renee, the lady who betrayed her, she was in love with, she was jealous of Noor. Noor was very beautiful. Everyone was falling in love with Noor. Noor was a good radio operator, so brains as well as beauty. And Renee was in love with this agent, Antelme. And Antelme, I showed you his picture earlier. Antelme was in love with Noor. And so this triangle, love triangle, and she just goes and betrays her. Or she sold her address for 100,000 francs. And that the Germans later said that they would have paid 10 times more for her because she was such an important agent. So there we are. It was the old love triangle story, but very unfortunate, tragic consequences.
So before we end, Shrabani, I just want to ask you about the new book, because I'm sure, I know it's a very different subject, but it would be great to just hear a little more about it, as it's hot off the press. And I think you know, people would be very interested to know what it is that you've been working on more recently, and
Sure.
about the story of Conan Doyle and the Parsi villager.
Yes, it is. I think, you know, Yasmin, every time I do a book on the wars, and then after that I need a break, so I do something else, because after Noor, I worked on Victoria and Abdul, because I said I need some entertaining. And then I did the one on First World War, and then after that I said, I need some more fun. So this is a story about George Idalji, a young lawyer of Parsi, sort of Parsi extraction in the Midlands. And he is convicted of a brutal crime of mutilating animals. And he is, when he's released on parole, he writes to Arthur Conan Doyle. All this happens in 1903. It all happens in a small mining village. He writes to Arthur Conan Doyle and says, "You are the only one who can clear my name. And, you know, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, we need Sherlock Holmes to help in this case." And Arthur Conan Doyle rises to this occasion, and he actually investigates. It's the only case he investigates himself. And so he stands up for George, and he gets him a free pardon. But there's a lot of complications that happen. And I found a lot of new material in police files. It shows, you know, how the police were get so upset when Arthur Conan Doyle comes in the picture. So the head of the police forces starts laying false trails to trip up Arthur Conan Doyle. So there's a whole side story going on of, you know, the police chief versus Arthur Conan Doyle. So it's a lot of fun, but also a very dark story of racism in this English village, because George is targeted very specifically because he's dark, because his father is Indian, and his father was the vicar of Great Worley. So it's a pretty strange story, in the sense that he was a young Parsi who converted to Christianity, came here, became the first South Asian vicar of a small village parish. And then these poison pen letters are written to them, and racist graffiti, and, you know, it all happened over 100 years ago. But sometimes you just feel, my goodness, this is still happening, you know, these letters of hate and these So they are targeted. And when there's a crime in the village, the one family, the only Indian family in this village become the prime suspects, and so on. So and then Arthur Conan Doyle enters the case. So it's all a lot of fun. So lots of adventure and mysteries, but also a very dark side to this whole story. It's called The Mystery of the Parsi Lawyer.
Really look forward to reading it, and I can see people saying that in the chat as well. So well, it just remains for me to say thank you very much to you, Shrabani. It's been really just wonderfully good talk and great images, and thank you for answering my questions and the questions of our audience, and thank you all for coming. And please do come to other events this week. This is the first of our events in the Bletchley Park week, but there's many other interesting talks happening this week. So do have a look at the Kellogg College website. So thank you very much indeed, Shrabani. You can't hear our applause.
I can see a lot of thank you.
You can see lots of thank yous.
I can thank you all for coming, and it's really been a pleasure to talk about Noor to all of you. So yeah, I hope you enjoy reading the book, Spy Princess. And yeah, thank you again.